Good morning. Imagine a 13-year-old girl standing on an observation deck, being systematically groomed to inherit a 50-warhead nuclear arsenal.
It's a striking image, isn't
It
it?
really is. Well, welcome to the table. You are joining us today for a comprehensive intelligence briefing. The date is April 28th, 2026.
And today's Deep Dives is sponsored by ProWave AI and generated by Stylo News, which is an advanced AI-powered news application.
Right. To give you some context on the tools powering this briefing, the Stylo News app is the consumer-facing version of the Stylo Intel Ops software.
Which, the enterprise system is actively utilized for operations by governments, military commands, and global businesses.
Exactly. What that means for you sitting there right now is that you have unique, direct access to the exact same analytical tools designed to support global decision makers.
Our operational mission for today is to deploy that toolset to provide a thorough, objective update on North Korea. We're analyzing the tactical and strategic patterns over the past 2 weeks.
So we'll be looking at their ongoing nuclear expansion, their deepening logistical and military alliance with Russia, and of course the broader impacts these moves are having across regional security dynamics.
Yeah, it's a highly complex geopolitical board right now. And just as a reminder, our goal today is to outline the different courses of action and examine the perspectives of all the key decision makers neutrally.
Right, strictly the facts. We are here to analyze, not to generate fear.
Exactly.
So, to understand North Korea's broader geopolitical maneuvers, we have to look at the raw physical data coming out of their borders over the last 14 days.
The physical evidence is key here.
It is. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, has reported a significant accelerated increase in nuclear weapons production at the Yongbyon facility.
Right, and current intelligence estimates now place the North Korean arsenal at approximately 50 warheads.
50 warheads. But, a nuclear program requires an immense industrial footprint, and that footprint is breaking containment.
It definitely is.
South Korea's unification minister recently identified a third uranium enrichment site located in Kusong.
Yeah, and to put that into perspective, enriching uranium isn't just a matter of digging material out of the ground.
Right, it's highly technical.
Exactly. It requires vast subterranean rooms filled with thousands of centrifuges spinning at supersonic speeds just to separate the fissile U-235 isotope.
Wait, supersonic speeds?
Yeah, it's an incredibly intensive industrial process. So when satellite imagery and intelligence confirm a third site coming online, it means they are actively scaling up the machinery.
They're building the infrastructure for mass production, essentially.
Precisely. They're moving from a boutique experimental nuclear program into full-scale mass production at a much faster rate.
And they're certainly not keeping the delivery systems for those weapons hidden either.
No, quite the opposite.
We are tracking reports of North Korea conducting strategic cruise and anti-ship missile tests from a newly launched 5,000-ton naval destroyer. It's named the Cho-Hayan.
It's a massive vessel.
It is. And on top of that, Leader Kim Jong-un has been personally supervising tests involving advanced cluster munitions and multiple ballistic missile launches near Sinpo.
Right on the eastern coast.
Yeah. So I have to ask, if Kim Jong-un is flaunting a massive new destroyer and firing high-density cluster munitions on the open sea, it looks like a naval parade on the open sea.
It's certainly a show of force.
That looks identical to the preparatory stages for an invasion. Why shouldn't we read this as an imminent physical threat to Seoul?
Well, it's a valid question. But when you look at the analytical consensus across the combined intelligence estimates, the baseline indicators for an actual invasion just aren't there.
What kind of indicators?
Things like mass troop mobilizations toward the border, hospital preparations for casualties, and massive fuel hoarding. We're not seeing that.
Ah, okay. So the logistical groundwork for a ground war is missing.
Right. The confidence level for a deliberate, large-scale attack across the DMZ remains very low.
So what's the point of this massive display then?
What we are observing instead is a strategy of coercive messaging.
Coercive messaging.
Exactly. By constantly testing these advanced systems like those cluster munitions you mentioned, which are designed to open in midair and scatter hundreds of bomblets over a huge area, North Korea is asserting an irreversible nuclear and conventional status.
I see. So it's about normalizing their capabilities.
Yes. They are systematically improving their operational proficiency while forcing the United States and South Korea to constantly monitor, react, and ultimately fatigue their early warning networks.
That makes sense. But, an arsenal of 50 warheads and a fully scaled military-industrial complex doesn't just sit in a silo.
It generates massive geopolitical leverage.
Exactly. And we are seeing North Korea cash in that leverage right now across their physical borders, specifically with Russia.
The Russia connection is expanding rapidly.
It is. The most literal example of this over the past 2 weeks is the completion of the Tumen River road bridge.
Which is a huge logistical shift. Previously, the primary connection across that incredibly short border was just a rail bridge.
And rail lines are efficient, but...
But they're also predictable and easy to monitor via satellite.
Right.
The completion of a vehicle-capable road bridge creates a physical, high-capacity, dispersed logistics artery directly connecting Russian supply lines to North Korean factories.
So it allows for a continuous flow of unmarked truck convoys.
Exactly. Completely bypassing maritime choke points and heavily monitored international airspace.
It's essentially a sanctions-proof physical artery.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And it's facilitating a very high level of exchange, which was underscored by a high-level visit to Pyongyang by the Russian Interior Minister just this past week.
Yeah, the diplomatic ties are mirroring the logistical ones.
And we also know exactly what is traveling along these newly reinforced supply lines. Ukrainian military analysis, which was backed by laboratory examination of missile fragments, confirms that Russia is actively firing North Korean ballistic missiles into Ukraine.
Yes, specifically the KN-23 and KN-24 models.
Right, and the technological makeup of those specific missiles tells a really fascinating story about modern warfare.
It really does. Ukrainian defense experts found that these North Korean missiles are constructed with relatively outdated technology.
Really? How outdated?
Well, they rely heavily on commercial, civilian-grade electronic components, literally the kind of chips you might find in standard consumer electronics.
Just to circumvent international sanctions.
Exactly. So they are far less precise and less advanced than Russia's own domestic Iskander missiles.
So wait, if they're using outdated civilian-grade tech that lacks precision, why is the Russian military dedicating so much logistical effort to getting them?
Because in an attritional war, volume becomes a quality of its own.
Overwhelming numbers.
Right. Ukraine possesses highly advanced Western air defenses, like the Patriot system, but those defense systems have a strictly limited number of highly expensive interceptor missiles.
Oh, I see. So by flooding the sky with cheaper, less accurate North Korean KN-23s?
Russia forces Ukraine to deplete its multi-million-dollar interceptors on cheap decoys. Once the air defense batteries are empty, the airspace is clear for the more precise, devastating Russian strikes.
Wow. That's a brutal strategy. And we're also seeing profound tactical adaptation on the ground, right?
Yes, we are.
Recent sources show that Russian forces in Ukraine are mounting North Korean Type 75, 107mm multiple launch rocket systems directly onto robotic ground platforms.
Specifically, an unmanned vehicle called the Courier.
Which is wild. So they are taking artillery and putting it on robots.
Essentially, yes. The Type 75 is traditionally a towed system, meaning it has to be pulled by a truck, set up by a crew of soldiers, fired, and then packed up again.
Which takes time.
Exactly. And in the current environment of constant drone surveillance, standing still for that long usually results in immediate counter-battery fire that wipes out the whole crew.
So the robots solve the human risk factor.
Right. By taking these North Korean rocket pods, reducing the tubes from 12 to 8 to manage the weight, and mounting them on remote-controlled robotic chassis, Russian forces can rapidly drive a drone into a contested zone.
They unleash a barrage and withdraw,
completely mitigating the risk to human soldiers. It's a striking example of how North Korean hardware is being directly integrated into the tactical evolution of foreign battlefields.
It's incredible to see that level of integration. Now, alongside the munitions and the bridges, there is also a joint project currently underway to build a friendship hospital in Wonsan, North Korea, with Russian assistance.
Yeah, health infrastructure as diplomatic currency.
Right. So looking at the sheer volume of weapons flowing west and a hospital flowing east, the power dynamic is incredibly complex. I mean, is North Korea an equal partner in this alliance, or are they simply a convenient, opportunistic supply depot for a stretched Russian military machine?
Well, it's less about equality and more about a highly synergistic transactional relationship.
Transactions.
Exactly. Russia desperately needs to secure the critical volume of artillery, ballistic missiles, and raw labor required for its immediate daily war efforts in Ukraine.
And in exchange.
North Korea demands hard currency, vital technological transfers for its own weapons programs, and crucial operational data on how its missiles perform in modern combat against state-of-the-art Western air defenses.
That real-world testing data must be invaluable to Pyongyang.
It is. But most importantly, Pyongyang gains a powerful multi-patron backing that severely weakens traditional Western deterrence.
Because they have a superpower in their corner.
Exactly. A North Korea backed openly by a UN Security Council member with a massive nuclear arsenal of its own is fundamentally insulated from the isolation tactics used over the past 3 decades.
Which brings us to the regional fallout. Because North Korea is now operating with that greater confidence, neighboring states are forced to rapidly adjust their own defense postures.
And those adjustments are causing real friction.
Let's start with South Korea and the United States. The alliance is experiencing notable stress right now. Internally, South Korea is dealing with significant political turmoil.
Yeah, the domestic situation is tense.
Former President Yoon Suk-yeol is currently facing prosecution over unauthorized drone operations that were sent into North Korea during his tenure.
And that prosecution has sparked intense domestic debate within South Korea regarding the legal and strategic boundaries of their own security policies.
It has to be a major distraction.
Absolutely. A nation dealing with a high-profile prosecution of a former leader over military operations is inherently distracted, making cohesive foreign policy much more difficult to execute.
And that internal friction is now bleeding directly into their external alliances. The U.S. has actually placed partial limitations on intelligence sharing with Seoul.
Which is a very significant move.
It stems directly from the South Korean unification minister publicly leaking the existence of that third uranium enrichment site at Kusong we discussed earlier.
Right, because intelligence sharing between allied nations operates heavily on trust and the absolute protection of sources.
So when it's leaked to the public.
From the U.S. perspective, when a foreign cabinet member publicly announces a highly classified facility, it compromises the methods used to discover it.
Whether that was a satellite trajectory, a cyber intrusion, or a human asset on the ground.
Exactly. South Korea maintains that the unification minister derived the information from open source analysis, but the U.S. response indicates a severe breach of protocol.
I look at it this way. Intelligence sharing is essentially like a shared bank account. The U.S. deposits high-level satellite data, and Seoul deposits on the ground human intelligence.
That's a good analogy.
But when Seoul's unification minister publicly leaks the Kusong site, it is like leaving the ATM receipt on the street for everyone to read. The U.S. is now freezing the account because they can't trust the security of the vault.
That is exactly the dynamic at play. However, to maintain the baseline military deterrence despite this diplomatic hurdle, the U.S. has had to reassure its ally.
Right. The U.S. publicly denied recent reports suggesting it might move its THAAD missile defense system out of South Korea to the Middle East.
Yes. And THAAD, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, is essentially a giant catcher's mitt in the sky, designed to shoot down ballistic missiles during their final descent.
Reassuring Seoul that the system is staying firmly in place was a necessary move to prevent panic regarding the physical defense of the peninsula.
Definitely.
Now, while the U.S. and South Korea manage their internal friction, Japan is making historic, sweeping shifts in its own defense posture.
The shifts in Japan are monumental.
They really are. Moving away from its post-World War II pacifist constitution, which historically limited its military to strictly defensive, non-expeditionary forces, Japan is actively converting its Izumo-class helicopter destroyers, specifically the JS Kaga, into full-fledged aircraft carriers.
And they are being retrofitted to launch F-35B stealth fighters.
Right.
Operating a flat-top aircraft carrier capable of launching stealth fighters is the textbook definition of power projection.
It's an offensive capability.
It means Japan is no longer just defending its own shores. It has the capability to strike deep into hostile territory.
And we cannot look at Japan's move without factoring in China's posture in this regional recalibration. China has recently deployed DF-27 hypersonic missiles.
Which is a massive leap in technology.
For those tracking the arms race, hypersonic missiles fundamentally change the physics of defense. Unlike traditional ballistic missiles that follow a predictable parabolic arc, making them easier for a system like THAAD to intercept.
Hypersonic glide vehicles travel at over 5 times the speed of sound?
Right, and they can maneuver unpredictably within the atmosphere. They render the traditional catcher's mitt virtually useless.
And these specific DF-27s possess the range to hit U.S. bases and carrier strike groups across the entire Pacific.
Which is a terrifying prospect. And while deploying those advanced weapons, China is also engaging diplomatically.
Yes. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi made a high-profile visit to Pyongyang just ahead of a highly anticipated U.S.-China summit.
So China is positioning itself as a vital, irreplaceable mediator.
Exactly, seeking to maintain its historical influence over North Korea while actively counterbalancing U.S. alliances in the region.
So looking at this entire regional board, Japan converting carriers to launch stealth fighters, and China deploying hypersonic missiles. Does Japan's remilitarization actually deter North Korea, or does it accidentally hand Kim Jong-un the perfect tailor-made justification to keep building his nuclear arsenal?
Well, this is the classic security dilemma playing out in real time.
How so?
Japan and South Korea view these military upgrades, the aircraft carriers, the advanced interceptors as absolutely necessary existential actions for national survival in the face of a rapidly expanding nuclear-armed neighbor.
Sure, from their perspective, it's self-defense.
However, from the perspective of leadership in Pyongyang and indeed Beijing, these same actions are viewed as hostile provocations designed to encircle and ultimately overthrow them.
That's a vicious cycle.
It is. And what makes this particular moment so volatile is the global context. The United States currently has a deeply divided strategic focus.
Right, the Middle East.
Yes. The Pentagon is heavily invested in managing interconnected crises in the Middle East, particularly regarding Iran and the Red Sea, while simultaneously trying to project strength in the Indo-Pacific.
So they are stretched thin.
Exactly. This divided attention, combined with the material backing from Russia, hands North Korea the exact strategic room it needs to exploit regional fractures. They can push their agenda forward with far less pushback than they would have faced a decade ago.
Which forces us to look at the final piece of this intelligence picture: regime continuity and the global repercussions of this successful proliferation.
The long-term game.
Right. We have examined the regional arms race, but we need to look at the long-term survival strategy of the Kim regime itself. The intelligence sources show a very deliberate, highly visible grooming process underway.
Yes, regarding Kim Jong-un's daughter.
Exactly. His 13-year-old daughter, Kim Ju-sai, is frequently appearing at these missile tests, military parades, and naval launches, heavily signaling dynastic continuity.
It's a highly unusual move for the traditionally secretive regime to place a young heir in such a public, deeply militarized spotlight.
Yeah, historically, successors were kept hidden until they were much older.
Yeah, they were. Displaying her at the launch of cluster munitions and intercontinental ballistic missiles serves to consolidate internal loyalty among the military elite.
It anchors the military to the family line.
Exactly. But more importantly, it signals to the United States and the world that the regime and its centralized nuclear command structure intends to endure for generations.
The implications of this successful deterrence model are inspiring other nations who feel encircled by Western alliances.
Yes, the ripple effects are global.
Iran is reportedly watching North Korea's playbook very closely. Our intelligence sources indicate that leadership in Tehran is seriously considering withdrawing from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT.
Withdrawing from the NPT is a massive diplomatic red line. The treaty is the foundational bedrock of global arms control.
But if they copy the North Korean model?
Well, from the perspective of Iranian leadership looking at a map, the strategic math is grim but straightforward.
How are they viewing it?
They are directly comparing how the United States treats a non-nuclear state versus a nuclear-armed state. When a country halts its nuclear ambitions or allows inspections, the U.S. and its allies often maintain aggressive military pressure, economic blockades, and targeted strikes.
Right, they face constant pressure.
But when a country successfully builds and tests a nuclear weapon, like North Korea, the calculus shifts entirely to cautious deterrence and restraint.
The geopolitical paradox is glaring, and international actors are actively weaponizing it in diplomatic forums.
Absolutely.
Russia's ambassador recently criticized the United States publicly for what he termed double standards regarding its nuclear policies toward Iran and North Korea.
Because if you are sitting in Tehran, North Korea isn't a pariah state.
What are they?
They are a successful beta test for regime survival. The specific regional mechanics of the Middle East and East Asia are certainly different, but the core lesson drawing attention globally is psychological.
The deterrence lesson.
Exactly. The North Korean model suggests that obtaining a verifiable nuclear arsenal is the single guaranteed shield against foreign intervention and forced regime change.
Wow. So based on these intelligence patterns, what are the most likely events in the short term that our listeners should watch for?
We can expect continued, highly visible North Korean missile signaling, further integration of military logistics across the Tumen River, and opportunistic provocations.
Just designed to maximize Pyongyang's leverage ahead of the upcoming high-stakes diplomacy at the U.S.-China summit.
That's right.
Well, that brings our intelligence briefing to a close. To our listeners, we want to explain exactly how you can access the analytical power we use to build today's deep dive.
The tools are incredibly accessible now.
They really are. Stylo News is available right now as both a mobile and desktop application. It empowers you to completely customize your own personal intelligence-style briefs on any topic.
Yeah, and the AI engine pulls, translates, and normalizes data from over 250 traditional news sources, international defense forums, and X in real time.
It utilizes advanced vector embeddings and retrieval-augmented generation to give you instant, source-linked answers to complex global events, mapping out the facts, just like we did today.
It is an incredibly powerful tool for cutting through the noise, bypassing the echo chambers, and finding the actual patterns of life and geopolitical shifts as they happen globally.
We highly encourage you to step into the analyst's chair. You can subscribe and get AI-powered news on demand by visiting www.stylonews.com.
Thank you so much for taking the time to sit at the table with us today. We know your time is valuable, and we appreciate you spending it diving deep into these critical issues with us.
Absolutely. And we would love to hear what you want us to investigate next. Feel free to request topics for future deep dives, and be sure to follow Stylo News on your favorite social media platforms to stay updated on global events.
We'll leave you with this final thought. We are looking at a geopolitical landscape where a 13-year-old girl is already being systematically groomed to inherit an expanding 50-warhead nuclear arsenal backed by a deeply entrenched logistical alliance with major global powers.
It's sobering.
It is. When the survival of a dynasty is physically hardwired into the possession of those weapons, what does the concept of denuclearization diplomacy even look like a decade from now?